Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. A small intro video here on a car that we've been developing, like a digital show car called X-Town. And you could see here in Unreal Engine, the car being fully textured with Adobe Substance tools, obviously materials, details, everything you can see here. And you can see it in motion. This car has been designed with exterior car designer Takumi Yamamoto, that you may know from the Citroën GT, together with Fred Gasson on the 3D modeling side. And then the interior design has been done by Arthur Couda and Maxime Daguet. And also the visual has been done by Ronan Mahon, leveraging Unreal Engine. So it's a project that we did quickly a couple of months ago. And the whole idea is to have a blank canvas and then being able to apply different materials, details, graphics, as you can see here. So we are swapping from materials to other materials, even changing the parameters of the carbon fibers, the different color and trim, the embroidery effects, all that being done in our tools, especially Substance Painter here. So you will see in the presentation, we are leveraging game technology, as Substance 3D is a leading solution in the game industry to achieve those kind of results and generate those kind of output in a game engine like Unreal. That's globally it.
Thank you for that, Pierre, for that quick introduction. I'll come back to you in a minute to introduce you a little bit further before we kick off this presentation and Q&A. My name, first of all, welcome to another Car Design News webinar. My name is Armo Sarich. I'm the Senior Content Producer here at CDN, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's session in partnership with our friends at Adobe. It's no secret that digital tools have become a cornerstone of modern car design. But they haven't always been the most intuitive, realistic, or supportive cross-team collaboration. Today, we look at how apps within Adobe's Substance 3D toolset can streamline design workflows, take visualization to a new level of realism, and much more. I'll introduce our speakers in a second, but just before that, just a quick word on the format of this webinar. We'll kick off, as I said, with a presentation and a demo from Adobe, alongside a special guest, before finishing off with some Q&A. That Q&A is there for you attendees, so please make the most of it. Get an opportunity to get involved. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it in the Q&A box on the right of your screen. I believe it should be the same for everyone, so it's not too difficult to find. Before we get started today, we want to know who we're talking to. And we want to know the kind of tools you're using. We've created a few polls that, again, you can use to help us shape this conversation. I'll read everything out in a second. But just before we go into that, it is located on the right of your screen, and I think it's just come up on the screen actually, so you are able to go through those polls. And please use them. It'll help us shape the conversation today. So as you can see, the first one is, are you currently using Adobe Substance 3D software in your pipeline? A very simple yes or no. The second question is, what is your primary 3D visualization tool? We've got a few options there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but please select one or other. And our third poll, is how would you describe your role or team? There's a number of options there. Again, select which one is most relevant to you. If not, you can write it in other. Now, let's get this discussion moving. We're really lucky enough to be joined by a trio of expert speakers today. They are Pierre Mahut, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Adobe Substance 3D, and we got Nicholas Pollack, Head of Content at Adobe Substance 3D, and Daniel Leiden, an Associate Product an associate at product design firm, Chris Leftery Design. Daniel has been designing a wide range of industries and applications, and is the author of a book on materials and sustainability that's due later this year. So if you do get an opportunity, check that out. Sure, Daniel will make a note of it at some point today through this discussion. Again, please do get involved as the session goes. We'll have time for audience questions at the end. And with that, I'll pass over to our expert speakers who will kick us off. Pierre, Nicholas, Daniel, over to you, and we kick off with a presentation.
Thank you very much, Amo. I lost my voice a couple of days ago, but it's back. I think it's a good news for everyone. All right, so the idea of today is to give you in a nutshell an overview of what we've been doing so far at Adobe Substance 3D, how you can leverage our tools in car design process. And finally, the second part will be mostly focusing on color and trim, color, material, and finish design. And here you should be able to see exciting new materials that we've been working on and how our tools has been used to generate those digital materials. But let's jump right in with the portfolio of products. So you may have heard about Adobe, I guess, through Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, After Effects. And we are definitely joining the team here. As you can see, the icons are similar. And we've also been working a lot on join workflows back and forth between our tools. But here you can see the full portfolio when it comes to 3D product. So something that is fairly new that we've been releasing end of last year is Adobe Substance 3D Modeler that allowed you to create either in desktop and in VR to manipulate virtual clay to generate quickly models. You will see it in action. It's something that we are very excited about because it's potentially one of the fastest 3D concepting tool on the market. You will hear about Substance Designer when it comes to create parametric materials. And here, the whole point is how you can leverage node graph, as you can find in Rhino, Grasshopper, or Houdini, or other solutions in order to generate procedural materials. Sampler will be a big focus of today because it's our tool that allows us to convert any kind of physical object or materials or light into a digital twin. And that's something that is definitely powerful for any car designer. Substance Painter also will be showcasing how you can both apply materials, but also apply details, stitches in a very fast and intuitive way. You can see it a little bit as a Photoshop of 3D because it's very, very flexible and creative. Last one will be a Stager, where you can generate renders very quickly and easily. Finally, the 3D asset is something that is very key in our offer, and it's led by Nicolas Pollack, who will be talking later on. You will see that we have a very, very rich library of ready-to-use materials, ready-to-use environment, and ready-to-use 3D models. But before jumping into the details of each of the tools, I also wanted to give a little bit of background about the Substance material format itself and what it allows to the users. So the first thing to notice is our materials are aiming at being photorealistic. So every image that you will see in this presentation are not pictures, are not done with camera taking a picture of an existing object or model. It will be a 3D renders. So when it comes to carbon fibers, to leather, to any kind of material you can find in interior and exterior, it's something that can be achieved with Substance. And so Substance material also are parametric. So I don't know if you are familiar with parametric tool in the modeling space, but here take in account that each material can be overlaid, changed through different aspects by parameters. And you can build those parameters so that the final user of those materials have the choice to change this and that parameters. That is super, super efficient for interior, exterior, even to tires. Like you can generate patterns, change the width, the bandwidth itself, even tear and wear, etc., through parameters using substance materials. And the beauty of it is also it's compliant and compatible with every tool. So if you do texture, for instance, the full interior of the car with Substance Painter, you can afterwards reuse it in VRED, in Unreal, as you have seen in the intro video, or in 3ds Max Corona. And the list is long. I will give more detail here. What is also very interesting is the parameters we are talking about. Those parameters can be changed staying in all those tools. So you are in Unreal, you want to change the leather, to change the pattern, you can. If you are in Blender, the same way. If you are in Maya, if you are in Omniverse, if you are in VRED, or if you are in DeltaGen, and all the ones that we are displaying here. So you don't need a Substance license to use a Substance material and change the parameters. It's either free plugin or native integration, like in VRED. So it's really something that you don't have to care about. It's just gonna work. I was mentioning before, Illustrator, Photoshop. We've been joining Adobe now about 3 to 4 years ago, and we've been working very intensively with the team to make as smooth as possible the usage of Substance together with Adobe tools, and also within our ecosystem of tools. So you can create, for instance, a material in Substance Designer, send it to Substance Painter, or sending it to Substance Sampler, back to Painter. Directly from Painter, you can send it over to Stager for rendering. And when it comes to 2D, 3D, I'm not listing them all, but just to give you an idea, you can go back and forth with vectorial shape between Illustrator and Designer, between 2D, 3D graphics between Illustrator and Stager, Sampler and Illustrator, and image filter in Photoshop. One thing that is also very well created is the capability to use a Stager and Photoshop together in post-production. Finally, you can see it at the bottom is what I was mentioning before. You have the different integration, but obviously integration with our own tools. So you can use 3D materials in 2D tools. So you can use 3D materials in Photoshop, for instance, or in Illustrator, and I will show it a little bit right now. So here you are in the latest version of Photoshop, and you go on the 3D asset library to get a Substance material. You could have been creating on your own or having a library within the company, and now you have a SBSIR file. You go, and I will even stop here. Then you go into Window, and then Materials, and then it will open this panel of materials. And by default, you will have a couple of materials anyway, so you can play around with it. And here is the parameters I was mentioning before. So you are in Photoshop, you have a 2D sketch, but you are applying 3D materials, and you change the parameters afterwards. What is also the beauty of Substance material is that it's fully tileable materials, so you can apply it to a large area, and it will repeat itself without any issue. Here we are bringing on a fabric where you can change the yarn independently from each other, and then obviously change the scale of it. So you can very easily, staying in 2D and in Photoshop, have those kind of results. You are more than used to it, having like masking and layer organization for your sketch. And for the concept phase, for giving an insight about the CMF design, color and trim design, the harmony, the testing, it's definitely one of the most efficient way you can do it. Similarly speaking, you are in Substance Sampler, you are designing, for instance, this kind of fabrics. You potentially want to do the graphic design itself in Illustrator. You have a graphic design in Illustrator. Directly from Sampler, you can start, launch Illustrator, make some modification here, turn it into a very colorful into black pattern, and directly you will have the feedbacks about how it will look like on your fabric. In exactly similar ways in Photoshop, starting Photoshop directly from Sampler, making some modification. Here, to be honest, it will be fairly random modification, but just you grasp the idea of what we mean here. And as soon as you start to paint, it will appear in sampler. So just imagine how quick and efficient are the creative loops. You can generate 5, 15, 500 variations and pattern and directly see how it will look like in 3D. And all those materials are ready to be used, again, in VRED, Unreal, Unity, DeltaGen, all the tools that you may be using. Another interesting tool that you may be familiar with is Bridge. You might be familiar with Bridge to browse 2D images or videos or things like that. Now you can also browse 3D materials and launch directly our tools from Adobe Bridge. Finally, something that is super important to have in mind is that as soon as you start to have those kind of digital material, digital twin, you can build your own material library, and here it's ready to be used everywhere in the different tool and mentioned, including the 2D tools like Photoshop. One tool I wanted to highlight today, obviously, is a tool that is heavily used in the visualization of car design, which is Autodesk VRED. We had this integration in VRED since a long time ago, and we are very happy with it. We have very good feedbacks from every user who have been using it so far. So I definitely encourage you, if you do use VRED in your daily workflow, to test it out. As you can see, you are in VRED, you are using a substance material as BSIR file, and you have also parameters. You can also change at any time the resolution of it, and you can play around with the more advanced organization of parameters. So you can independently change the stitches, change the metallic or the roughness of some of the materials, and get direct feedbacks about how it will look like. And back to the point I was making earlier, if the concept designer has been using it in Photoshop to apply as BSIR substance material file in his original digital sketch, you can reuse exactly the same digital twin of material as BSIR file in VRED. So you can have consistency across the workflow from Photoshop to VRED, and also from VRED to Unreal, or from VRED to any other kind of tools I was listing before. So you have one definition of the material, a virtual definition of the materials, and then it's ready to be used anywhere else. And depending on the purpose, you might think like you want always to have full resolution, but sometimes you want to optimize for a VR experience or even an AR experience, and you want to have the same material but slightly lower quality when it comes to the size of it. You can rely on the same substance material for doing it. So it's something that is really impressive. Here is some render from Pascal Seifert from the VRED team. And you can see the carbon fiber, for instance, material I was using on my digital sketch in Photoshop. The same one is used here in VRED. You will see, but there is some eye candy materials or things that can be very valuable. As this clay materials you can see on the left. What we wanted to do is, for instance, you have a clay model in the design studio you can see every day, and you compare with a digital variation that you've been doing with the 3D tools. You can do it by applying those clay shaders and materials to your digital mockup. Digging into the creative workflow, we'll showcase in a nutshell what are doing each of those tools, from modeler to the modeling, material authoring with sampler, designer, and 3D asset, texturing in Painter, and rendering in Stager. So when it comes to modeler, again, it's a very brand new tool. One of the very specific aspect of modeler is that you can switch back and forth without like closing or reopening the file. You just put your VR goggles on, and you can switch between a VR desktop and a VR mode and a desktop mode back and forth. So we are very excited about this product. You can see that the menu also adapts itself depending on if you are in VR or in desktop. You can have those pattern repetition. And here in a nutshell, I have a very short demo about like a 3D artist on our end, who by the way is not car designer, but he's been playing the role of the car designer for this specific demo. where he's switching from sketching on Photoshop to have a first idea about what he's looking for, to a first rough 3D sketch, a 3D volume directly out of Modeler. So you can see that, like in real life, you can change the shape of your tools. You can remove digital clay or twist it, turn it, bend it. And I guess for the one who've been doing a clay model, it's definitely faster than doing it in the real life. And it's something that we are very, very excited about. So you can see that here, Justin, the person here has been using Oculus Rift. Our tool is working on every Oculus Meta headset, and we're also expanding the scope. So now you can also use it with HTC Vives and Valve Index. But again, we also have a desktop mode. So if you don't have a VR headset, it does work also very well. Something I wanted to show is more on the Xdown. So back in the day, we did not have Modeler when we developed Xdown, so we did it afterwards. But here is Gio Napkir, that is a 3D artist also on our end, an amazing character artist that never did car design before this video. But he's been playing around with rim design, with tire design, and then you will see with exterior of the car. And you have those radial symmetry, you have a bunch of really cool way to design object, and you can have like a very rough way of doing first volumes and then remove digital clay in the different parts where you need it, and also have more tension in some part of the object, or make it smoother. It's really talking to any physical clay modeler, because it's a very sculptural approach. And here, obviously, afterwards, you have the capability to leverage the fact that you are in a digital space. So you can replicate as many variations as you want, and then have a pretty big impact on the object afterwards. So we are using a technology called SDF that is very, very flexible. It's not knobs, it's not like high-end class A, definitely not this level of surface quality. But when it comes to concept, it's super, super efficient, because you can generate a lot of deformation, repetition, and things like that in a very, very flexible way. So for concepting, it's definitely a super, super efficient way. And here we were in VR mode, and now we are switching to the desktop modes for navigating around and checking the proportion and the volume of the car. And so you can see that it's definitely less shaky because we are not in the VR headset anymore. Moving on to sampler, here, how to turn, for instance, materials, physical materials into digital twin. That's how you will be doing it. You are a CMF designer. You want to turn the sample you have on your desk into a digital materials. You take a picture like this one, or you have a material scanner like a Visu or Tag 7, and then you are turning it into a digital material, and you are making it tileable. So we've been creating the tool in a way that you are combining filters as you will be doing in Photoshop and Illustrator, but what you do manipulate in the end is a 3D materials. And then on top of it, you can add like a kilt, as we had in the VRED demo, so that afterwards it can be used either in a Substance Painter, but also in here, for instance, Autodesk Maya, and back to Stager. So you can afterwards use these capture materials in any tools that I've been presenting before. What is super nice is also the connections with creative cloud tools such as Illustrator. So you might be surprised to see all here, but you've been doing this design in Illustrator, and then you want to see it apply in a material, and especially having a very specific embroidery effect on top of it. What you will do is you will get the SVG file from Illustrator, applying it as a bitmap input to your materials, and then you will stack the different effects that you want to apply on top of it. So here you are seeing that the whole graphic is an embroidery, and it will automatically turn it into a 3D materials that is corresponding to an embroidery. And then you have the full control on the embroidery to change any aspect of it. And you can see also that the embroidery filters is open to get additional inputs, also as still image or vectorial image as we did. So here we can change the scale, the threads, the embossed distance, etc. directly within Sampler. So things that usually used to take a pretty long time to any visualization artist will take a couple of seconds or minutes to be applied. So it's definitely something that we are very excited about. And to the point I was making earlier in my presentation, at any time you can keep the link with your original graphic that you used to have. So if, for instance, you decide to change some parameters, so here, for instance, we also change the subtract to turn this part being more denim. But if you want to change the graphic design, you can go back to Illustrator, make some modification. Here, for instance, adding a nose to it, and you will automatically see how it will look like in your embroidery filters as soon as you save it in Illustrator. So it's something that, again, you are saving a lot of time beforehand to make it happen, but you are also saving a lot of time if you want to do any kind of retake. So if you are working on a branding, for instance, and you want to have an embroidery on the seat, and you are still iterating on the graphic design of the brand or the model of the car, it's super flexible. Something that we were very excited about is that we provide the tools, and especially a Substance Sampler, to a class of the Art Center for a CMF workshop. And they've been exploring the tools, and it was the very first time they were playing with it for CMF design thing. So here, for instance, one of the students been capturing some painting she made on her own, and then turn it into embroidery to afterwards apply it to other parts of her object, and it was as easy as that. So we are very excited about how especially Substance Sampler is expanding the CMF digital tools. And in this very specific aspect, we've been very recently adding 3D capture to Sampler. So you can manage materials, you can manage lighting, and you can manage 3D object. So here you take a bunch of pictures of the same, here, baseball glove. You are deciding about the bounding box of the outputs, and then you ask the software to process it to generate a first 3D mesh. So the beauty of photogrammetry is that you capture both the 3D mesh and the texture when you are doing it. But maybe the object that you've been capturing, you want to change some part of it, especially when it comes to the texturing. So very easily, you can afterwards move on to Substance Painter, adding some details, removing some details, change the color, even do some additional variations in Substance Painter. So it's really an interesting part of the pipeline. You either create your object with 3D modeler, for instance, but you can also have your object by acquiring an existing geometry. So you could imagine that you have a clay model in the workshop, a 1/5, 1/3, or even a scale 1 clay model, and you want to capture it and then modify it in Modeler, or adding details here, like in Painter for the windows and the shot line, etc. You could do it in Substance Painter as we are doing it here. So it's something that we just released, but we are really excited about, and we are strongly believing that it's a game changer for the creatives. I will go fast afterwards. Substance Designer is mostly about creating procedural pattern through node graph. So here you might be familiar with that. We have dedicated content such as like those tile sampler nodes, and depending on the inputs, you will generate different types of patterns, and we can go pretty far in the pattern creation. But here, I'm pretty sure that Nicola and David will be showcasing things more in detail. Painter, you're directly painting details, adding decals, adding stencil, etc. and it's not the focus of today. Finally, Stager, the latest tool we have that is focusing on virtual photography. This capability of send to, so you are in Substance Painter, you say send it to Stager, it will automatically send both the 3D model and the texture, and you are ready to go in Stager. For instance, you can generate directly a turntable by having this model from Painter to Stager and then generate the turntable. On top of turntable, we also have those like moving the environment capabilities. Finally, back to what I was mentioning at the very beginning, Unreal, Unity, VRED, DeltaGen, Kittia, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, Blender, you name it, are supporting the substance material format and allowed you to change the parameters staying in those tools. Finishing on the 3D asset, you will see it more in detail, but in a nutshell, you have materials, models, light, and you can see back to the intro video that all the material that was used on the X-Town is coming out of this 3D asset library, and all materials of the 3D asset library has been designed using our tools, especially Adobe Substance Designer. But I will leave the stage to Nicolas to move on for the 3D asset part.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Hello, everyone. So my name is Nicholas, and I'm leading the 3D Assets library and team. And today I would like to share a few thoughts about how substance tools and digital practices can help material design in the digital space. And I will briefly speak about three things. First, a bit more information about the Substance 3D Assets library, which is very dear to my heart, as well as the team behind it. And secondly, I will discuss about the opportunities of this digital-driven design opportunities for creative globally. And finally, to present one of the latest projects from the team and try to inspire you as we try to step into the shoes of digital material design to work together with Daniel. But first thing first, let's start with Substance 3D Assets. Substance 3D Assets is the library of ready-to-use content that is part of the Substance offer. It's a product that we created back in 2016 that was gathering all the Substance materials that we created, and it was mainly purposed to be utilized in the game industry with AAA game designers looking for highest quality content with the parametric aspect, and that has become and still is for now one of our core values. And the offer is very simple: is we aim to provide users with photorealistic content that is true to life, no matter the way you create it, that enables you to start with the highest quality without having to spend time trying to make every single material into your project. And to follow on what Pierre mentioned several times, the fact that it's a substance format enables not to be dealing with static textures, but dynamic materials that have embedded parameters, making of each materials a micro library of the potential of endless variations that you would use as a designer. And obviously, as we curate from the visual aspect, the library, we do that also on a technical standpoint, making sure that our content are fit to work in as many workflows as possible. And finally, the value that encompasses everything is that it works everywhere, so that the materials that you utilize are not something that you dedicate only to one tool, as you are using perhaps several of them, and you can retain, as Pierre said, the key values, especially the parametric one, into several other apps within Substance and outside Substance. Next. So what is part of the library? Obviously, 3D materials, we are more than 12,000 of them. This is what will enable you to come to go from the clay or the untextured part to all the very important details of the surfaces. Then 3D models, we have 5,000 of them. This is ready to texture parts that you can assemble and use to bring that into your scene without having to make it yourself, and allowing you to focus on what's really mattering, which is your design. And finally, 3D light. And we speak about 3D light, it's about what enables you to create the best lighting for your product. Moving on to the next slide. This is what we have in terms of materials dedicated to automotive, and the library has been expanding in that dimension a lot in the last few years to create a color entering palette with more than 1,000 materials, from the prototyping materials such as clay, Dynoc, and even camos, to interiors, leathers, and quilting and stop stitching, to exterior materials for every part of the car, really. And we recently added 300 3D models that are components that would potentially benefit to add some details where you don't have to spend the resources modeling them yourself, especially during concepting. Moving on to the next slide. This is one of the example. You've seen these style lots already, but this is a project that has been shared with talented visual artist Onno Dorsun, and this car is basically the application of all this content that I was presented before. And so the materials, decals, and both for interior and exterior have been used from the library to create these visual. And if you move to the next slide, it's a visual that we created to showcase, some of the elements that were used, especially for the interior, showing that it's really about personalization, and the value of the material is how you actually personalize them to fit your design intention. And moving on to the next slide, it's not only about materials for cars, because visualizing cars is always into context at several stages of the design process. And so the library is very helpful also to be providing breadth of content that can be applied on the surroundings of the scene, allowing you not to be taking too much time on things that are just secondary. So next, let's move on to what does it mean for color and material design, and how does it mean for creative within the automotive industry, and how not only Substance 3D assets, but the Substance tools can enable in terms of digital transformation. The first things that come to mind is actually digitalization. So going from what's in the physical world to the digital space to save some time, enable some better communication. But moving forward, what does it mean in terms of creativity? What does it mean for color and material designers, color and trim designers, to be able to expand what they do, to get new skills, to be making better design faster and in a more efficient way? And these are a few enablers that I believe, and we believe, are some of the key opportunities that we can see moving forward with the tools in the digital space, about being able to expand creative exploration in the digital space with a lot more flexibility and freedom that you would do in the real world, to visualize design intention much earlier in the design process in a photorealistic way, so that decision making is a lot more easier. Speaking with people that are not designers or people from engineering, making sure that what you want to achieve is something that you can describe in a much more detail that you would do with other techniques and methods to essentially downstream reduce prototyping to exactly what you want to try in the real world. And next slide is a couple of elements that we believe is interesting into a fully integrated color and material design process. It's about personalizing the digital twins, the digital materials and objects that are part of the process. It's about creating color and trim library of potential variations, things that you would spend a lot of money and time getting from suppliers, is something that you already can visualize, whether you use scanning or you create it from scratch, or you do something in between, like using something that already exists in the digital space to enhance something that you captured, is also a way to create this wealth of knowledge and database for CMF designers to be passing through a lot more option that that they would be able to do in the real life. And that makes me come to the second point, which is about being a playground for designers, experimenting things a lot more, and that's where parametrism and substance sort of help in making some variation and experimenting more what is possible, what is desirable, to be exploring a lot more, because in real life it's costing some money to do so, and so you have to reduce that to the amount of things that's you know, or you have a very important hunch will work. This is the opportunity to, in the digital space, because it costs a lot less, virtually nothing, to be experimenting at large options and very fast concepting. To a final options next, which is advanced material visual prototyping, and this is another very smart tool that you have into Substance Sampler, which is about creatively designing fabrics, where you have complete control about all the properties of the structure and the yarn independently from each other, where you can very quickly design harmonies and constructions before engaging discussion. And having this trial before will enable to be a lot more focused later on in real life exploration. But it's probably better to show a few things that we've done ourselves in trying to experiment this. And this is why we've been discussing and working with Chris Leftry Design, and we are very lucky to have Daniel Liddon with us today. And we've been contacting them to be working on exactly that, and I'd be happy to have Daniel sort of a follow-up with presenting his expectation, the collaboration throughout the next few slides.
Thanks, Nicholas. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Liddon, and I work at Chris Leftry Design, which is a design consultancy where we specialize in materials. And we started talking to Nicholas and Pierre a while ago about potential collaboration between us, where we would look at some specific materials and how to recreate these materials in Substance Designer, and to try and find out some areas that were of interest to us, and the substance team to really push things forward in an interesting way. And I think, Nicholas, you mentioned before, you described the software as a playground for designers, and I think that's really the right way to think about it, because the materials that you see on this slide, they're all really interesting technologies, quite difficult to get your hands on them sometimes. You might have to find very specific suppliers that make these materials. When you get the samples, to actually physically interact with them, it rarely matches your expectations. They're typically research type materials and technologies that we're looking at here. So we started to think about how to make these materials in Substance Designer. And if you move to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is a good example. So we have some samples in the studio of a so-called thermobimetal wire. So it's essentially a wire that you hook up to some electricity, and it starts to sort of twist and move in reaction to that, which is great. I mean, it's really an interesting material and really fun to play around with it like this. But then if you move to the next slide, please. In recreating this material in using a digital tool like Substance Designer, you can start to actually design with it, make it larger, smaller, changing all kinds of parameters about this material. So again, this is really for us the sort of real eye-opening moments of this collaboration has been this way of making inaccessible materials quite accessible, and being able to actually design with these materials in a really fun and interactive and interesting way. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, this is just elaborating on that point, being able to control every aspect really of these materials, and how a textile in this case and this wire kind of interact together as well is really cool. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is another variation on of the same material. So it's a material that you can get in wire form, but there's also thermal bimetal sheets. So here we have some sheet-based ideas using the same sort of thinking and the same way of working with the software. We can quite quickly explore different options like this. So that's been a real interesting process of
if I may, what was very interesting to us was to go from the behaviors to trying to start concepting and designing, moving from just a few ideas that you designed into the studio to really creating this sort of a pre-concept of a design and starting to play with layers and expanding that to things that couldn't have been possible, you know, at early stage of a design unless you just, you know, start heavily prototyping, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think just finding the right type of textile that would work with this. You saw the sort of physical sample that we had. Maybe it turns out that we only have one, you know, gray textile in the studio, and being able to quickly just generate lots of visuals with different color textiles. Maybe it's about the wire or the sheet, the shape of the actual material itself. Being able to play around with that in a sort of software environment is obviously a real game changer in terms of speed and the amount of variations that you can create. So this is another variation on the same theme. So we have some magnetic and thermobimetal sheets actually on this page, and recreating certain behaviors and effects digitally, and then applying it on a car. Actually, in the physical world, that's a huge leap, right? I mean, to go from that simple experiment that we saw before in the studio to actually making a sort of physical model and applying it on a car. I mean, it's I believe if you go to the next slide, we can see some of the the interaction of these panels on the roof of the car, which is mimicking how these materials behave in the real world. And it's such a cool, interesting way of working. There's another type of material. These are called auxetic patterns or materials that actually expand when you stretch them. Most materials, if you stretch a rubber band, for example, it goes thinner. But with these materials, they actually expand and grow fatter when you stretch them. So playing around with different patterns, different scales, digitally like this is obviously really useful and interesting exercise for a designer. If you move on, please. Ferrofluid is an interesting technology where essentially you take an invisible phenomenon or an invisible force, like the magnet itself, and make it visible with this liquid that has magnetic particles in it. You can actually visualize the sort of magnetic field. And this is playing around with these patterns that you see. It's playing around with several magnets. I have a visitor that's not supposed to be. It's the midterm holiday. Schools are closed. Several different magnets interacting with the ferrofluid here. If you move to the next slide, please. Oh, that's it. Thanks very much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, guys. We appreciate that a lot. Just before we wrap up for today, we've got a bit of a Q&A that we'll go through. But before doing so, we actually have a third poll that we'll push out now to the audience. And this poll is basically just describing your role and team. So if everyone could quickly just select one of the answers there, or again, other, appreciate that. Before we move, as I said, before we move on to the Q&A, a lot to think about there, and really interesting collaboration between the two. We'll get straight into it with a few questions that have come through and comments from the audience. This is directed more probably to the Adobe team, but I understand Substance 3D is quite closely related to the gaming industry. What benefits does that bring to the car design process? I'll just close the poll so you can actually see who speaking to. Oh.
Right. So on this specific end, as I was mentioning over the video intro, Substance 3D tools has been used in the gaming industry for many years now. We have almost like 95 to 99% of the biggest studio, the AAA studios that are using our solution to texture their games. But the need of the game designers are very similar to the need of any car designers or product designers, that they want to see real-time experiences, real-time feedback, and quick loop of iteration. So we ended up being part of a broader revolution of game technology coming over to the industry and the car industry in general. So together with Unreal, Unity, Substance 3D, we are all part of this gaming industry, gaming tool, game developers tool that now has been expanding to the usage of different parts of the industry, either the UI UX or the visualization or the color, material, and finish design that we just showcased. And so that's what we've been embracing. And it's also been very, very interesting to see how the different worlds are cross-pollinating each other. The gaming industry and the car industry. Takumi Yamamoto has been the exterior designer of the car, has been working first at Citroën and then moved to Polyphony Digital, the game studio. And same thing with also VFX and animation world. We've been doing a car design contest that was like art car contest virtually, and we ended up, one of the winners, for instance, is working now at ILM, so more on the VFX side of the house. It's very, very exciting times.
Interesting. So we've got a few questions that are coming through the Q&A from our audience. We've got one here for a member of the audience asking, what of AI integrated in 3D Substance? I'm not sure who amongst you can comment on that. But...
Oh, it's a very good question, an interesting question, because you've been emerging a lot of visuals coming out of AI recently. Interestingly enough, we've been implementing AI in especially Adobe Substance Sampler since 2 years or 2 or 3 years now, because our capability to turn physical sample into digital materials has been optimized and trained on artificial intelligence to give you a better result directly for the first try. So it's been something that we've been working on a lot and already implementing, like you already have it in our tools. That being said, we also are looking for implementing it in as many parts of the tool as it would make sense. One thing that we are focusing on also in parallel is to make sure that also the usage of AI is aesthetically correct. We are not using any artwork that is not our own property, and also using it when it's making sense. Sometimes like regular computer science, computer graphics are making the job, and AI is not the only solution that solves everything. It depends on what is the kind of topic and where it's making sense. But we are definitely already implementing it, and we are very excited about it because we see it as it's a concept that our founder Sébastien Deguy is taking on a regular basis. Augmented artistry is at the core of everything, and I think Daniel, you are showing that also, is that we are creating tools to make creators even more creative or having the power to do any kind of experimentation rather than a tool that is hard to learn or you are fighting or struggling with. We want the tool for the people to have fun with it and to explore things that they wouldn't have explored in the real world.
Thank you, Pierre. Appreciate that. Can we get a comment about your collaboration with Art Center on the project, for the project on product design? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so we made a dedicated article that we have on our magazine, but it was very, very interesting because we had around like 10+ students that never used Substance tool before, Adobe Substance 3D tools before, and the idea was to let them explore the material creation, especially with the image to material capability of Adobe Substance Sampler, to create their own CMF virtual tray selection, material boards, and have like an exploration that is starting from the physical world, but then being expanded by the virtual iteration. And the feedback from the students has been amazing. Like we've been very excited because they had several projects in parallel, several workshops. And as soon as they started to work on our workshop, they've been also applying the same approach to the other workshop that they had in parallel. And we also kept in touch with many of those, and they keep on using our tools since. So we are very, very excited, and it's definitely something we want to replicate and to do again. We did something similar with Modeler, 3D Modeler at ESD Valenciennes, together with a creative company called Le Cycle. And we also had a really great exploration. What we love by doing that is that the students, this new generation of designers and creators, usually they don't have like, I've been using this and that tools for 10 or 15 years, so I'm not moving away from it because I know it so well. They are still looking for their pipeline. They are really keen to explore new pipeline, new tools, and it's been super interesting journey. But here, yeah, Nicolas has been graduated from Valenciennes, so he might tell even more.
Anything to add, Nicolas?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's happening in the same way to me as a designer when I joined the family, moving from the other side of the mirror, which is something I felt for a very long time. As a designer, I wanted to be efficient into sharing the concept that I wanted to work on, to be convincing decision makers, being understood by other designers and other people from the company and outside of it, and engineering. And I think that that trying to shape and to get the tools that were helping me, as you know, for the CMF work, was very critical, because I struggled to be, you know, on one hand showing a sample, and on the other hand showing a drawing, and have people's imagination do the trick in between. And so this I think is an opportunity to be accessing ways to be more creative and to be a lot more efficient as a designer, because you're much more confident into what you're designing or making when you sit in a better environment. And also, as to follow up on what Daniel mentioned, also is to get access to things that I wouldn't have before. I had to guess work lots of things as well, and to be able to work with technologies, or to sort of try to understand by myself how to design with these technologies without having to go into very expensive and very timely creation of prototype, injection molding tools prototypes, which would, you know, make my proof of design, you know, spend a lot more time before, you know, I can decide if it's good or bad. It's really something that that can change the way you're doing better design, really.
Thank you for that, Nicolas. Just before we wrap up, I just want to comment from all three of you about today's session. What are the key takeaway? At the end of the day, why is this all important? If you guys, just 30 seconds from each of you, that would be great.
Daniel, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think I don't know any other tool that's available that will let you experiment in such depth with materials. So if you're a materials nerd, like I think all three of us are materials nerds, it's really an interesting tool to be able to go on that this granular level of experimenting with materials digitally. I can wholeheartedly, as an outsider, I can wholeheartedly recommend that you give it a go.
Nicolas?
Okay, what can I say? I think yes, really, the takeaway for me is about using the tools of the digital where it can benefit the design process and design practice. It's not about trying to fit or retrofit something that you did in a different way before, but add this to the palette that you use on a daily basis to get better at what you do.
Exactly. And maybe one thing I will take also as an example is like, we've been using Photoshop and Illustrator forever to do 2D creation, and having something similar when it comes to flexibility. Like, I guess many people are using Photoshop like in ways that they might not be very organized when it comes to the layers, etc. But they still are looking for the final result to express themselves and the creativity that they have. The tools that we've been building in Adobe Substance 3D are very embracing this ability to do it in a very creative way. While back in the day, the 3D tools were mostly perceived as constraints and seeing that were like you have to stick to it and to respect that you have to click in that order to have the results. We try to make it as messy as the creative process can be, and the software to respect that and to leverage it and help you out to do like very crazy cool exploration. And that's what we've been able to do with Daniel and the rest of the team with Chris Leftery Design. And we are very excited about that. Like the final result that we were able to achieve is something that was stuck in our head since a long time ago, and Daniel, you can testify. And now we are able to do it, and this also reflects how creative the tools who are used in the gaming industry. It's done in the design industry in a different way, but as exciting or even more exciting for designers as we all are.
And if I may add just one more thing, it's not the end because we're still working with Daniel at the moment on the final step. And also I would like to thank also the team of artists on the Adobe side who worked in this project as well, and been really invested into creation of this collection, but also on the rest of the content that you'll find on the library.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. A perfect way to sum it up. I'm just a bit cautious about time. We've gone 9 minutes over. So I just want to say thank you to all our guests today that joined us. This session will be available on demand in the next few days, a recording of it. Hopefully, with the on-demand session, the video that you saw at the start will have an audio on the back of it, so you'll be able to see the full video with audio. So I just want to say thank you to Pierre, Nicholas, and Daniel for joining us today, sharing that presentation and demo, and sticking around for the Q&A. Appreciate you joining us, and see you at the next installment for the CDN live streams / webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Amo. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
All right.